Listen closely. Can you hear it? A faint, rhythmic drumming echoing from deep within a forgotten jungle, or the ghostly chant of a ceremony lost to the sands of time. These are the whispers of history's strangest chapter, the world of lost rituals. For centuries, across every corner of this planet, human civilizations developed ceremonies and practices that, to our modern eyes, seem completely baffling, utterly bizarre, and often defy all logic. These weren't mere superstitions or simple traditions. They were complex, deeply held rituals that entire societies built their lives around. Rituals whose true meanings have been swallowed by the centuries, leaving behind only fragments of a puzzle we are still trying to solve. The masks, the artifacts, the cryptic instructions carved into stone, they all point to a reality where the rules were different, where the line between the spiritual and the physical was blurred in ways we can scarcely comprehend. Imagine standing in the heart of one of these ceremonies. The air is thick with the smoke of unknown herbs. People move in patterns that seem chaotic yet are deeply precise, and the purpose of it all is a mystery that sparks both unease and a profound curiosity. Why would an ancient culture engage in a ritual that seemed to offer no practical benefit, or even one that appeared to court danger? These lost rituals challenge our very understanding of the past, forcing us to question what we think we know about human belief, community, and our drive to connect with forces greater than ourselves. They are historical anomalies, practices so strange that they feel like they belong to another world entirely, and they reveal a side of our ancestors that is far more complex and enigmatic than the history books often portray. Today, we embark on a journey to unearth these forgotten rites. We will travel across time and continents to explore 25 of the most bizarre, mind-bending lost rituals ever documented. From whispered secrets in royal courts to public spectacles that captivated thousands, each one is a window into a world so different from our own. This is more than just a list of oddities. It is an exploration into the human psyche, a testament to the incredible diversity of belief and the lengths to which people will go to find meaning, ensure survival, or appease the unknown. So settle in, keep an open mind, and prepare to be amazed, because the stories we are about to uncover are as fascinating as they are mystifying. Our journey begins not in a somber temple or a dark, secret chamber, but in the vibrant, sun-drenched streets of ancient Rome amidst a festival of pure, unbridled joy. This was the Hilaria, a spring celebration held around the vernal equinox in honor of the mother goddess Cybele. For one extraordinary day, the entire social order of Rome was turned upside down. The rigid hierarchy that defined Roman life simply melted away. Imagine the most stern, respected senator you can picture, a man accustomed to giving grave speeches in the forum, now standing on a street corner telling his best jokes to a crowd of cheering commoners. Picture dignified matrons and revered philosophers engaging in public buffoonery, their laughter echoing through the city. This wasn't just permitted, it was a sacred duty. The entire point of the festival was to generate as much laughter as possible, a collective roar of mirth that was believed to shake off the gloom of winter and recharge the very spirit of the city. The logic behind this seemingly chaotic celebration was deeply intertwined with the myth of Cybele and her consort, Attis. The festival commemorated the death and, crucially, the resurrection of Attis. His return to life symbolized the rebirth of the earth itself in spring. The Romans believed that the act of universal laughter was a powerful magical force that mirrored this resurrection. It was a sonic fertilizer for the soul of the state. By creating an atmosphere of pure hilarity, the citizens were participating in a sympathetic ritual. As their laughter brought life back to their own hearts, so too would it ensure the vitality and fortune of Rome for the coming year. To refuse to participate, to remain dour and serious, was seen as almost an act of civic sabotage, a refusal to help renew the state's vitality. This is what makes the Hilaria so bizarre and logic-defying to our modern minds. We understand comedy as entertainment, a release of tension, but for the Romans, it was a genuine spiritual and political tool. The laughter itself was the ritual, a wave of sound meant to physically ward off misfortune and ensure a prosperous season. In a world filled with stern rituals and bloody sacrifices, the Hilaria stands out as a beautiful, strange, and wonderfully human attempt to harness joy as a tangible, world-altering force. From the vibrant, collective laughter of ancient Rome, we now travel to a place of profound silence and unimaginable personal discipline. The remote mountains of Japan, where a ritual of such extreme austerity unfolded that it challenges our very understanding of the limits of human endurance and faith. This is the terrifying and awe-inspiring practice of Sokushinbatsu, a process where Buddhist monks sought to achieve the ultimate state of enlightenment not after death, but by transforming their own living bodies into eternal, incorruptible vessels of the Buddha. The very name Sokushinbatsu translates to a Buddha in this very body, a goal so monumental that it required a path of deliberate, grueling, and years-long self-mummification. The journey to become a living Buddha was not a sudden decision but a meticulously planned, multi-stage ordeal that could take over 1,000 days to complete. It began with a radical phase known as the tree-eating diet. For the first 1,000 days, the monk would eliminate all grains from his meals, surviving only on what could be foraged from the forests around his temple, nuts, seeds, berries, and the resinous inner bark of pine trees. The purpose of this phase was twofold: to remove every trace of body fat which decomposes quickly after death, and to drastically reduce the body's moisture content, creating an environment where bacteria and other decay-causing organisms could not thrive. This was essentially a deliberate, conscious process of drying oneself out from the inside, turning the body into a leathery, desiccated shell. Following this, a second, even more extreme 1,000-day phase would begin, where the monk's diet was restricted to a scant handful of roots and a special, poisonous tea brewed from the sap of the oroshi tree, the very same substance used to make lacquer for pottery and furniture. This poisonous tea was a crucial and horrifying component of the ritual. The monk would drink it slowly over time, knowing its toxic properties were slowly permeating his system. The goal was not to induce a quick death, but to make his own bodily tissues so saturated with poison that they would become utterly repellent to insects, maggots, and other scavengers after his passing. The final act of this sacred transformation was perhaps the most chilling. After years of this torturous preparation, the monk, now emaciated and his body preserved in a near mummified state even while he breathed, would enter a small, underground stone tomb scarcely larger than his own body. His only connection to the outside world was a thin bamboo breathing tube and a bell. Sealed inside his living tomb, he would enter a state of deep, final meditation. Each day, he would ring the bell to signal to the monks outside that he was still alive, and when the ringing finally stopped, they would wait another 1,000 days before unsealing the tomb to see if the ritual had been a success. If the body was found intact, uncorrupted by decay, the monk was declared a true Sokushin-batsu, a living Buddha revered and enshrined. If the body had decomposed, he was still honored for his incredible devotion, but the ultimate goal had eluded him. To our modern sensibility, which holds self-preservation as one of our most fundamental instincts, the logic of Sokushin-batsu seems completely inverted. We see immense, deliberate suffering leading to a solitary death, but for these monks, this was not an act of self-destruction. It was the ultimate act of spiritual dedication and compassion. The excruciating process was seen as a way to purge oneself of all worldly desires and attachments, the very things that, according to Buddhist teaching, cause suffering and trap souls in the cycle of rebirth. By conquering the fears and pains of the physical body in the most extreme way imaginable, They sought to achieve a state of perfect enlightenment and become a permanent beacon of spiritual power, a guardian for their community who could intercede on behalf of the living for generations to come. Their preserved bodies, seated in perpetual meditation in temples across northern Japan, are not grotesque relics but revered symbols of a will so strong it defied the natural order itself, a permanent reminder of a belief system where the ultimate freedom was found through the most radical denial of the self. Leaving behind the silent, solitary quest for enlightenment in Japan, we are now transported to a scene of stark and horrifying contrast: the bustling, powerful city-state of Carthage, where the air was thick not with meditative silence, but with the smoke of a different, far more chilling form of devotion. Here, the ritual was not about inner peace, but a communal plea for survival and favor, directed towards a deity whose name still evokes a shudder: Baal Hammon, a god often conflated in history with the terrifying figure of Moloch. This was the Tophet, a sacred precinct where the Carthaginians performed a rite that stands as one of the most disturbing and logic-defying practices in the ancient world: the sacrifice of their own children. Imagine the scene under the harsh North African sun. A massive, hollow bronze statue of the god looms over a ceremonial space, its arms outstretched and angled downward, forming a chute into a fiery pit in its chest. The statue's face is not one of benevolence, but an impassive, metallic mask gleaming in the heat. Priests in ornate robes would place a living infant onto these cold, metal arms. With a solemn push, the child would slide down into the inferno raging within the statue's core. And as this act unfolded, the air would be filled not with prayers or lamentations, but with the frantic, deafening clamor of drums, cymbals, and flutes. This music had a very specific, horrifying purpose: to drown out the sound of the child's cries and, perhaps more importantly, to stifle any potential cries of grief from the parents who were required to witness this act. This is the element that makes the ritual so profoundly alien and unsettling to our modern understanding of human nature. The parents were not merely passive, unwilling victims of a cruel state religion. According to historical accounts from Greek and Roman sources who viewed Carthaginian culture with a mixture of fascination and horror, the parents were expected to be active, willing participants in this supreme act of piety. They were to show no outward sign of grief, no tears, no cries of anguish. To display sorrow was considered a grave offense, an act that could invalidate the sacrifice and bring misfortune upon the entire community. The child's death was not seen as a tragedy, but as an offering of the most precious thing a family could give. It was a transaction of the most extreme kind, a belief that by offering the life of their firstborn, the parents and the city as a whole would secure the continued favor of Baal Hammon, ensuring military victory, bountiful harvests, and protection from calamity. The logic from their perspective was brutally pragmatic, a form of spiritual insurance taken to its most horrifying extreme. In a world governed by capricious gods, what could possibly be more valuable to offer than the ultimate symbol of a family's and a community's future? The silent, stoic acceptance expected of the parents was the final, crucial component of the ritual, the proof of their unwavering faith and their absolute prioritization of the collective good over individual biological instinct. Archaeological evidence from the Tophet in Carthage, a field filled with thousands of small, charred urns containing the cremated bones of infants and young animals, often marked with dedicatory stelae, provides a grim, silent testimony to the scale and longevity of this practice. These were not the burials of children who died of natural causes. The remains show signs of being exposed to intense, consistent heat. To walk among those ruins today is to stand on one of history's most somber and challenging grounds, a place that forces us to confront the terrifying power of belief when it collides with the most fundamental of human emotions. The Carthaginians were not monsters, they were a sophisticated, successful civilization. And that is what makes this ritual so deeply haunting. It demonstrates how a seemingly universal truth, the protective love of a parent, can be completely inverted by a powerful, all-consuming system of faith, creating a reality where the ultimate act of love was perceived as the ultimate act of destruction. Shifting from the communal terror of Carthage to the brutal, personal world of Norse vengeance, we encounter a ritual so savage it lives on the very edge of myth and history. This is the Blood Eagle, a legendary form of execution from the Viking Age that stands as one of the most gruesome spectacles ever conceived by humankind. While the Carthaginian sacrifice sought to appease a god for the future benefit of the community, the Blood Eagle was a retrospective act, a ritual of retribution designed to inflict a maximum of posthumous agony upon a specific enemy as an offering to the gods of war. The procedure, as described in a handful of Old Norse sagas, is almost too horrifying to visualize. The victim, typically a captured king or noble who had wronged the executioner, was placed face down. His back was sliced open with a sharp blade cutting straight down the spine. The ribs were then carefully severed from the vertebrae one by one and pulled outward, breaking them to form a grisly, bony framework resembling a pair of spread wings. In the most extreme accounts, the final macabre touch was to reach into the chest cavity, pull the lungs out through the gaping wounds and drape them over the splayed ribs. The slow, agonizing act of breathing would then cause the lungs to flutter weakly against the victim's back, creating the appearance of a bloody, shuddering eagle in flight. The very existence of the Blood Eagle as a literal, historical practice is the subject of intense scholarly debate. The primary sources are literary epic sagas written down centuries after the Viking Age had ended. Some historians argue that these descriptions are later, Christian-era inventions, gruesome propaganda designed to paint the pagan Norsemen as inhuman monsters. They suggest the sagas are employing powerful, symbolic poetry, not recording forensic fact. Yet, other researchers and recent archaeological evidence point to the disturbing possibility that it was a real, if exceptionally rare, rite. A skeleton from a royal burial in England, for instance, shows wound patterns consistent with the first steps of the Blood Eagle procedure. The debate itself is a testament to the ritual's power. It exists in that shadowy realm where history and nightmare converge, a story so terrifying that its mere telling was meant to inspire a primal fear. But what possible logic could justify such an atrocity? For the Vikings, this was not mere torture. It was a deeply symbolic, sacred offering to Odin, the All-Father, the god of war, poetry, and the hanged. Odin was associated with birds of prey, particularly eagles and ravens, the scavengers of the battlefield. By transforming a human body into a bloody effigy of an eagle in flight, the executioner was creating the ultimate sacrifice. He was giving Odin a flying offering, a living, breathing piece of art dedicated to the god's glory at the very moment of the victim's death. Beyond the divine dedication, the Blood Eagle was the ultimate display of dominance and a brutal form of poetic justice. In the sagas, it is often performed to avenge the death of a father. The logic was one of inversion and humiliation. You killed my father, robbing me of my lineage and honor, so I will not merely kill you, but I will dismantle your body, the very vessel of your being, and refashion it into a sacrifice for my God. Your death will not be a clean passage to Valhalla, but a prolonged, excruciating spectacle that forever seals my reputation and utterly annihilates yours. It defies every modern concept of justice or warfare, transcending simple killing to become a form of ritualized art, where the human body was the canvas and unbearable suffering was the medium. It was a statement written in blood and bone, declaring that some enemies were so despised that their very physical form needed to be unmade and repurposed, their last moments on earth becoming a horrifying tribute to the power of their conqueror and the grim demands of their gods. From the visceral, battlefield vengeance of the Blood Eagle, we now journey to a different yet equally harrowing form of ritual death, one not born of rage but of a chilling, prescribed devotion. We enter the world of ancient and early modern India to confront the tradition of sati, a practice where a widow would end her own life by ascending her deceased husband's funeral pyre and being consumed by the flames alongside his body. The very word sati does not mean suicide. It derives from the Sanskrit word for a virtuous woman, and it referred specifically to the woman who performed this ultimate act. This distinction is crucial as it frames the act not as a tragedy, but as the fulfillment of a sacred wifely duty. To understand sati is to first understand the devastating social and legal position of a widow in traditional Hindu society. Upon her husband's death, a woman's identity and social standing were effectively erased. She was considered inauspicious, a bearer of bad luck, and was often excluded from celebrations and religious ceremonies. Her head would be shaved. She was expected to wear only plain, white mourning clothes for the rest of her life, and she would typically face a stark existence of austerity and servitude within her husband's family, with little hope of remarriage or a life of her own. For a woman of high social status, this fall from grace could be particularly brutal. In this context, the fiery pyre could be seen not only as a religious ideal, but for some, as a preferable alternative to a long, bleak life of social death and servitude. It is vital to note that sati was never a universal or mandated practice across all of India or throughout all of Hindu history. It was always relatively rare, its prevalence fluctuating across regions and centuries, and it was most commonly associated with the warrior Rajput clans and the Brahmin priestly class, where it served as a powerful marker of family honor and elite status. The ritual itself was a stark public spectacle. The steps were heavily formalized, creating an atmosphere of solemn inevitability. After the husband's death, his body would be prepared for cremation and transported to the burning grounds. The widow, often dressed in her wedding finery as if preparing for a final, macabre reunion with her spouse, would be expected to walk in the procession. At the pyre, she would often perform specific rites, such as handing out her jewelry or circling the structure. Then she would take her place beside or upon her husband's corpse, or sometimes lie down with her head resting on his. In many accounts, her male relatives would use long poles to hold her down once the flames were lit, a grim contradiction to the official narrative of a purely voluntary act. While there are documented cases of women who appeared to go willingly, even with an air of ecstatic resolve, the immense social and familial pressure surrounding the event cannot be overstated. A widow who performed sati brought immense and everlasting honor to her birth family, her husband's family, and her entire village. This honor translated into tangible prestige, elevating the status of her relatives for generations. Conversely, a widow who refused faced not only a life of hardship but could also bring shame and social ostracization upon her entire kinship group. The choice in such a pressurized environment was often no choice at all. The logic that defies our modern understanding is found in the religious and spiritual beliefs used to justify the practice. This was not seen as self-destruction, but as an act of such profound fidelity that it transcended mortal life. A woman who became sati was believed to be consumed by her sattva, her inner purity and goodness, which generated a spiritual heat so intense it could burn away her husband's sins, no matter how grave, ensuring his salvation and a place in heaven. Her act of supreme self-sacrifice was thought to cleanse not only her husband but her entire lineage of accumulated sin, bringing divine blessings upon her descendants for generations to come. She herself was instantly transformed into a goddess, a Devi, with temples and memorial stones known as sati stones erected in her honor. These stones, found across India, often depict the woman with a raised hand, a symbol of her benediction, and they became sites of local worship. This belief system created a perverse and powerful inversion of values. In a worldview that treasures individual life, sati presents a reality where the deliberate, painful extinction of one life is seen as generating immense spiritual and social capital for the collective. The widow's individual suffering and terror were reframed as a sacred, necessary fire that purified the entire community. The British colonial administration, horrified by the practice, eventually outlawed it in the early 19th century after extensive lobbying by Indian social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who argued from within Hindu scripture that the practice had no true religious basis. Yet, the echoes of sati linger in those memorial stones and in the powerful, disturbing idea that a woman's greatest virtue could be so catastrophically intertwined with her own annihilation. But now, we cross the English Channel to the misty, forested lands of the ancient Celts, where we encounter a ritual so visually arresting and terrifying that it has burned itself into the modern imagination. This is the legend of the Druidic Wicker Man, a practice described by Roman generals and historians with a mixture of fascination and strategic horror. According to figures like Julius Caesar in his Gallic Wars and the geographer Strabo, the Celtic Druids, the intellectual and spiritual elite of their tribes, would construct colossal, cage-like figures woven from willow branches and wicker, shaped in the form of a gigantic man. These immense effigies, standing as tall as a building, were not left empty. The Roman accounts detail how the Druids would fill the vast hollow compartments of the Wicker Man with all manner of living offerings, cattle, sheep, and other animals, but also, and most shockingly, human beings, prisoners of war, criminals, or perhaps even volunteers. Once the giant was packed with this terrible cargo, the Druids would set the entire structure ablaze, creating a screaming, roaring inferno in the shape of a man, a sacrificial bonfire on a truly monstrous scale. The logic behind such a staggering act from the Celtic perspective was one of supreme efficiency and cosmic bargaining. The Druids were the intermediaries between the tribe and the gods who controlled the forces of nature, warfare, and the harvest. A sacrifice was a transaction, a gift given to secure a greater favor in return. By offering not just one life, but a whole collection of lives, both human and animal, contained within a single, symbolic vessel, they were making the most potent offering imaginable. The Wicker Man itself was a powerful piece of sympathetic magic. Its human shape may have represented a god, perhaps Tyrannis the Thunderer or Cernunnos the Horned God of the Forest, or perhaps it represented the collective spirit of the tribe itself, being purified and renewed by the flames. The sheer scale of the sacrifice was meant to match the scale of the request. Victory in a looming war, the end of a plague, or most crucially, the fertility of the land for the coming year. In a single, horrifying spectacle, the community believed it could cleanse itself of misfortune and pour its collective vitality back into the earth, ensuring its own survival. Yet, we must tread carefully here, for the shadow of Roman propaganda looms large over this entire story. Caesar, after all, was in the midst of a brutal military campaign to subdue these very Celtic tribes in Gaul. He had a powerful political motive to portray the people he was conquering as savage, superstitious barbarians whose practices were so abhorrent that Roman conquest was not just an act of expansion, but a moral necessity, a civilizing mission. By describing rituals like the Wicker Man in vivid, gruesome detail, he was justifying his wars to the Senate and people of Rome. No archaeological evidence for the Wicker Man has ever been found. No giant wicker baskets full of charred bones have been uncovered. This has led many modern historians to seriously question whether the Wicker Man was ever a widespread historical reality, or if it was instead an exaggerated tale, a terrifying piece of wartime gossip, or a complete fabrication designed to dehumanize a formidable enemy. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. The Celts certainly practiced human sacrifice. There is archaeological evidence for that, such as the famous Lindo Man bog body found in England, who appears to have been a ritual victim. But the specific, theatrical spectacle of the giant wicker effigy might have been a rare, localized practice that the Romans seized upon and amplified, or a complete misunderstanding of a more symbolic ritual that did not involve live burnings. This unresolved debate is precisely what makes the Wicker Man so compelling and logic-defying. It exists in that precarious space between historical fact and powerful myth. The image itself is unforgettable, and it was masterfully brought to life in the 1973 British horror film, The Wicker Man, which transplanted the ancient concept to a remote, pagan Scottish island. The film's climax, with the giant, smiling wicker figure engulfed in flames against the twilight sky while the islanders sing a folk hymn, has become an iconic piece of cinema. It captures the communal, almost celebratory atmosphere that might have surrounded such an act, a chilling reminder that what we perceive as sheer horror could be seen by another culture as a sacred and necessary duty. Whether a real druidic practice or a brilliant Roman smear campaign, the Wicker Man endures as a symbol of the extremes of belief, a testament to the power of an image so bizarre and terrifying that it continues to haunt us, forcing us to wonder how much of the dark tapestry of history is woven from truth and how much from the clever, persuasive threads of a conqueror's story. Now, let's travel far from the wicker effigies of ancient Europe and into the humid, vibrant heart of Mesoamerica, where the thunderous echo of a heavy rubber ball hitting a stone wall signaled not just a game but a matter of cosmic life and death. This was the sacred ball game, known to the Maya as Pac-Atok and to the Aztecs as Olamalistli, a ritual so central to their worldview that its courts were built at the very center of their cities, right beside the grandest temples and pyramids. To call it a sport would be a profound understatement. This was a reenactment of creation itself, played with a staggering, life-or-death stakes that completely upends our modern understanding of victory and defeat. Picture the scene: a long, narrow, eye-shaped court with towering, slanted stone walls. The players, often nobles or even kings, were clad in protective padding made of leather and wood, their most vital piece of equipment being a heavy leather belt around their hips. The object of the game was to keep a solid rubber ball, weighing as much as 8 or 9 pounds, about the size of a volleyball but with the heft of a bowling ball, in constant motion, using only their hips, thighs, and upper arms to strike it. They could not use their hands or feet. The goal was to propel this heavy, bouncing sphere through a stone ring set high up on the wall, a feat so difficult that it was considered a portent of great fortune, almost like a hole-in-one in golf witnessed by an entire city. The game was fast, brutal, and physically devastating. The force required to launch the ball with one's hips could cause severe internal injuries, and broken bones were a common hazard. The constant, violent impact of the game was a core part of its symbolism, echoing the cosmic struggles of the gods. And then came the final whistle, so to speak, but the outcome was not what you might expect. For games of deep religious significance, the conclusion was often shocking. In many instances, the captain of the losing team was ritually decapitated. Yet, in a twist that defies all our cultural programming about competition, there is also significant evidence that sometimes the winning captain was the one chosen for the sacrifice. This is the element that makes the ritual so alien and logic-defying. How could victory and defeat both lead to the same grisly fate? The answer lies not in the mundane world of sportsmanship, but in the sacred realm of myth. The ball game was a reenactment of the Maya creation story, the Popol Vuh, in which the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque journeyed to the underworld and defeated the gods of death in a legendary ball game. In one version of the myth, one of the twins is decapitated, his head used as the ball in a subsequent game before he is miraculously restored to life. This story of death and resurrection was the central metaphor of the game. The logic, then, was one of supreme honor and cosmic necessity. The ball itself represented the sun moving across the sky. The court was a portal to the underworld. The game was a battle between the forces of life and death, day and night. A sacrifice, particularly the sacrifice of a skilled, noble, and vigorous player, was the ultimate offering to the gods. His life force, his blood, was the precious payment required to ensure the sun would defeat the darkness each day and rise again, to guarantee the rains would come, and to maintain the very cycle of life and death for the entire world. Whether from the winning or losing team, the chosen individual was not being punished. He was being elevated. His death was a direct, immediate, and glorious form of apotheosis, transforming him into a divine messenger, a companion to the hero twins. The decapitation was swift and public, a sacred act that sent a powerful, honorable soul directly to the gods. The stone carvings that adorn these ancient ball courts show this vividly. Scenes of players holding the decapitated heads of their opponents, with serpents and flowering vines, symbols of rebirth and the cycle of life, sprouting from the severed necks. This was not a depiction of savagery, but of sacred transformation. The message was clear: from this profound sacrifice, new life would spring forth. It turns our concept of winning and losing completely on its head. In our world, victory means life, success, and celebration. In the Maya world, a truly significant victory in the ball game could mean the ultimate honor for the most accomplished player, the chance to give his life so that the entire cosmos could continue. To be chosen was to become a hero who ensured the sunrise, a fate far greater than any trophy. After the high-stakes drama of the Mesoamerican ball game, where life and death hung on the bounce of a rubber ball, we turned to a ritual of quiet, meticulous precision that was just as vital to its people: the ancient Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony. In a civilization that devoted immense resources to the world of the dead, this was the crucial, final act that bridged the gap between a carefully prepared corpse and a fully functional, living being in the afterlife. It was not enough to simply preserve the body through mummification. The Egyptians believed the soul, or the Ba, needed a physical vessel that could actively participate in eternity. Without this ritual, the deceased would be a blind, deaf, mute, and suffocating prisoner in their own tomb, eternally trapped and unable to enjoy the afterlife they had spent their entire life preparing for. Imagine the scene deep within a rock-cut tomb, the air heavy with the scent of incense and myrrh. The mummy, or sometimes a statue serving as a substitute body, stands upright, surrounded by a procession of priests and the deceased's grieving family. The chief priest, taking on the role of the god Horus, the son who ritually restored his own murdered father Osiris to life, would approach the wrapped figure. In his hands, he held a collection of bizarre and specific tools, the most important being a ceremonial adze often crafted from meteoric iron, a material from the heavens imbued with celestial power. This was not a violent act, but one of profound, symbolic tenderness. The priest would gently touch the adze to the mouth, eyes, ears, and nostrils of the mummy, each contact accompanied by the recitation of exact, potent spells from the Book of the Dead. In some versions of the ritual, a forked instrument known as the Pesesh Kef was used to part the lips, and the mouth was even anointed with milk and honey. The entire ceremony was a complex symphony of gesture and word, a magical operation designed to kickstart the senses of the dead. The logic here is what truly defies our modern, scientific understanding of life and death. For the Egyptians, the mummy was not a mere relic, it was a dormant piece of sacred technology. The opening of the mouth was the ritual that supplied the power, the divine spark, to bring that technology online. They saw the human being as a composite of different elements: the physical body, the ka or life force, the ba or personality, and the name. Death was the fragmentation of these parts. Mummification preserved the body, but the opening of the mouth ceremony was what reintegrated the ka and the ba back into that body, effectively reanimating it for the next world. The spells recited were not mere prayers, they were performative utterances, words that held the creative power of the gods themselves. By saying, "I open your mouth for you," while touching it with the adze, the priest was not describing an action, he was performing it on a metaphysical level. He was magically restoring the faculties of the deceased, ensuring they could breathe the air of the afterlife. eat the lavish food offerings left in the tomb, see the sun god Ra on his daily journey, hear the prayers of their descendants, and speak the necessary spells to overcome the dangers of the underworld. This was a literal, spiritual reanimation that bypassed biological death entirely, operating on a plane where symbolic action, spoken word, and divine will could override the physical laws of decay. It was the ultimate act of preparation, ensuring the deceased was not just preserved but truly alive in the world to come, a world they believed was just as real, if not more so, than the one they had left behind. This intricate belief system reveals a culture that saw existence as a continuous thread, where death was merely a transition, and where the correct ritual, performed with perfect precision, was the key that unlocked the door to eternity. From the cosmic ball courts of the Maya, we now journey to the birthplace of democracy itself, ancient Athens, where we find a ritual that presents a shocking paradox. In the shadow of the gleaming Parthenon, a practice existed that was the very antithesis of democratic equality, the ritual of the pharmakos. During times of severe crisis, such as a devastating plague, a crippling famine, or the ominous approach of an enemy army, the citizens of Athens would turn to a deeply ingrained purification rite. They would select one or two individuals, known as the pharmakoi, to serve as the city's scapegoats. These were not criminals or prisoners of war. They were often the most vulnerable members of society, the physically deformed, the destitute, the homeless, or the intellectually disabled. They were chosen precisely for their ugliness and their marginal status, seen as living embodiments of the city's accumulated pollution or miasma. The ritual itself was a bizarre and cruel ceremony of inversion. The chosen individual, this human vessel for the city's sins, was not immediately cast out. First, he was treated to a feast fit for a king. He was led through the city and showered with the finest foods Athens could offer: rich cheeses, dried figs, and a special ceremonial cake. For a brief, surreal moment, the lowliest outcast was elevated to a position of supreme honor, his every need catered to by the very community that had shunned him. This feasting, however, was not an act of charity or repentance. It was a crucial part of the symbolic process, a way of loading the pharmakos with the prosperity and vitality of the city, making him a potent, concentrated container for all that was good, which was now inextricably mixed with all that was bad, the miasma. After the feast, the ceremony took a violent and terrifying turn. The same citizens who had just fed him would now beat him with fig branches and squills, a wild onion plant believed to have purifying properties. They would strike his genitals to symbolically sterilize and remove his corrupting influence. He was then driven out of the city gates, or in some accounts from other Greek city-states, even stoned to death or thrown from a cliff, his body cast into the sea or left unburied beyond the boundaries of the polis. The logic that defies our modern sensibilities is found in the Athenian concept of miasma. This was not a metaphor. It was a tangible, spiritual pollution believed to cling to a community like a foul odor, angering the gods and bringing down their wrath in the form of natural disasters and disease. Miasma could come from many sources: a murder left unavenged, a violation of sacred law, or simply the accumulated moral failings of the people. The only way to cleanse the city was to physically remove this pollution. The pharmakos became the perfect symbolic sponge. By being feasted, he absorbed the community's goodness, and by being a marginal figure, he was already a natural repository for its badness. His violent expulsion was, in their eyes, a literal act of civic cleansing. The city was not murdering a man, it was exorcising a sickness. The entire community participated, transferring their collective anxiety, fear, and guilt onto a single, helpless individual, and then violently purging that individual from their midst. This created a powerful, psychological resolution to a crisis that may have had purely natural causes. It gave the populace a sense of control, a tangible action they could take when faced with the terrifying randomness of plague or famine. The well-being of the many utterly depended on the ritualized sacrifice of the one, a stark and chilling precedent where the mechanisms of collective psychology completely overrode any notion of individual rights or justice. It reveals the dark underbelly of the Greek world, a profound fear of the gods' disfavor that could justify astonishing cruelty, all in the name of saving the very civilization that gave us philosophy, theater, and the idea of a government by the people. Leaving the city-states of the ancient world behind, we now ascend, climbing higher and higher into the thin, frigid air of the Andes Mountains, to a place where the ritual involved not the scapegoating of the unwanted, but the sacrificial offering of the most cherished and perfect beings in the entire Inca Empire. This is the Capacocha, a ceremony so profound and devastating that it challenges our deepest instincts. Far from being an act of simple cruelty, this was the ultimate act of state-sponsored devotion, a transaction between the Sapa Inca, the divine emperor, and the gods themselves, with the most innocent lives of the empire serving as the sacred currency. Imagine the journey of a chosen child. They were not snatched from their homes in terror, but selected with immense care and honor from communities across the vast expanse of Tahuantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. These were not the sickly or the weak. They were physically flawless children, often the sons and daughters of local nobility, celebrated for their beauty and health. To have a child chosen for the Capacocha was considered the highest privilege a family could receive, a direct link to the divine that brought honor to the entire community. Once selected, the child would embark on a long, ceremonial pilgrimage, sometimes walking for months alongside priests and imperial attendants, journeying toward one of the empire's most sacred huacas or holy sites, the summit of a towering, snow-capped volcano. These were not arbitrary locations. Peaks like Mount Luleloko, soaring over 22,000 feet above sea level, were believed to be the dwelling places of the gods, the literal points where the earthly realm touched the celestial. The journey itself was a sacred procession, a moving tapestry of ritual that wove the farthest corners of the empire back to its spiritual and political heart in Cusco. Upon reaching the base of the mountain, the final, elaborate ceremony would begin. The children were treated as living embodiments of purity and divine messengers. They were feasted and given offerings, including elaborate gold and silver figurines, fine textiles, and pottery. But the most crucial preparations were physiological. Archaeological evidence from the stunningly preserved mummies, like the famous Luleloko maiden and her two younger companions discovered in 1999, reveals that in their final weeks their diets changed dramatically. They were given large quantities of chicha, a fermented corn beer, and coca leaves, the raw material for cocaine. This was not an act of poisoning, but a deliberate, ritualistic altering of their consciousness. The chicha and coca would have sedated them, easing the symptoms of altitude sickness and the terror of their final hours. It likely put them into a state of stupefaction or deep sleep, making them more placid and accepting of their fate. They were, in a very real sense, being gently guided into the afterlife, prepared to stand before the gods not as frightened victims, but as serene and willing ambassadors. Then came the final ascent to the summit. In the punishing cold and thin air, the priests would complete the ritual. The child, now deeply sedated, was placed in a small, seated burial chamber or a simple grave dug into the permafrost. They were often wrapped in fine, elaborate textiles and surrounded by a wealth of grave goods. Contrary to lurid tales of violent death, the evidence suggests most met their end through exposure or by being buried alive while unconscious. The extreme cold acted as a perfect preservative, quickly freezing their bodies and creating the natural mummies that have survived for 500 years, their faces peaceful, their features intact as if they merely fell asleep. The logic that defies our every modern impulse is found in the Inca worldview. These children were not being murdered, they were being transformed. the Inca believed the gods, particularly Inti the sun god and Viracocha the creator god, required the most valuable offering to maintain cosmic order. What could be more valuable than a perfect, untainted human life, a life at its peak of purity and potential? By offering these children, the Sapa Inca was engaging in the highest form of reciprocity, a concept known as Aini. He was giving the gods the ultimate gift to ensure they, in return, would provide what the empire needed most: stability, fertility for the crops, the prevention of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, and the continued health and expansion of Tahuantinsuyu. The children became deified beings, apus or mountain spirits who would eternally intercede on behalf of the living from their celestial thrones. Their death was a sacred investment in the survival of millions, a belief so powerful that it could compel a civilization to send its most beautiful and innocent members to die alone in the ice, forever frozen in a state of divine grace as permanent guardians of the empire they left behind. Now we pivot from the planned, sacred sacrifices on Andean peaks to a scene of pure chaos erupting in the very heart of medieval European towns. Picture a public square in Strasbourg, Germany, in the year 1518. The air is not filled with prayer or the usual sounds of commerce, but with a frantic, discordant rhythm. Dozens, then hundreds of people are suddenly seized by an irresistible compulsion, their bodies convulsing in a wild, uncontrolled dance. They are not celebrating, their faces are contorted in agony and terror. They leap, they twirl, they scream and cry, their limbs flailing as if pulled by invisible strings. This is the dancing mania, also known as St. Vitus's dance, a bizarre and terrifying phenomenon that swept through mainland Europe from the 14th to the 17th centuries, leaving contemporary witnesses utterly baffled and modern historians still searching for answers. These were not isolated incidents. The mania was a true plague of motion, sometimes involving thousands of people who would dance for days without rest, their feet bleeding, their ribs cracking from the exertion, until they literally dropped from exhaustion, suffered heart attacks, or in some tragic cases, died right there in the mud of the town square. The sheer scale of these outbreaks is what makes them so difficult to comprehend. In one famous case in Aachen, Germany, the mania grew so large and disruptive that the afflicted were loaded onto carts and transported to a nearby chapel dedicated to St. Vitus, where it was hoped the saint could intercede and cure them. Historical woodcuts from the time depict these scenes in stark, haunting detail. They show crowds of men, women, and children in the throes of this frantic dance, their bodies twisted in impossible positions, surrounded by onlookers who seem a mixture of horrified and helpless. The participants themselves often described feeling an intense inner heat and an overwhelming sense of dread that could only be alleviated paradoxically by continuing to move. They believed they were cursed or possessed, and the only way to break the spell was to dance themselves free of it. This created a terrifying feedback loop. The more they danced to escape the feeling, the more exhausted and delirious they became, reinforcing the very mania they were trying to overcome. So what could cause such a widespread and specific breakdown of human behavior? Scholars have debated this for centuries, and several compelling, albeit unsettling, theories have emerged. One of the most prominent is the theory of ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye, a staple grain of the medieval peasant diet. This fungus produces alkaloids that are chemically similar to LSD, a powerful hallucinogen. If a community's grain supply was contaminated, entire populations could unknowingly ingest this substance, leading to convulsions, spasms, terrifying hallucinations, and a sensation of burning skin symptoms that align eerily well with the descriptions of the dancing mania. The logic here is biochemical. A toxic reaction in the brain caused by a common food source could have triggered the initial physical compulsion to move erratically. However, this theory doesn't perfectly explain everything. Ergotism often causes gangrene and severe vasoconstriction, which are not commonly mentioned in accounts of the dancing plagues, and it seems unlikely that the same contaminated grain would produce such a synchronized, group-specific reaction over such a wide geographic area. This leads to a second, perhaps even more fascinating explanation: mass psychogenic illness. This is a modern term for what was once called mass hysteria. It describes a phenomenon where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms within a cohesive group. Consider the context of medieval Europe in the centuries following the Black Death. Society was reeling from a catastrophe that had wiped out a third of the population. Life was defined by profound poverty, constant fear of disease, brutal warfare, and a religious worldview that saw divine punishment behind every misfortune. The psychological pressure on the common people was immense and unrelenting. In such an environment, the dancing mania can be seen as a catastrophic collective nervous breakdown. It was a form of psychic contagion, where the sight of one person's breakdown could trigger a chain reaction of suggestibility in others who are already living on the edge of despair. The dancing became a non-verbal, physical scream, a way for a repressed, traumatized populace to express the terror and helplessness that they had no other means to articulate. The bizarre logic, then, is that of a fractured psyche. These people genuinely felt an invisible force compelling them to dance because their conscious minds could not process the overwhelming trauma of their existence. The mania was a desperate, unconscious performance of their inner turmoil, a bodily rebellion against a world that offered no solace and no escape, a terrifying spectacle where the only way to cope with an unbearable reality was to literally dance themselves to death. From the chaotic, involuntary movements of medieval Europe, we now shift to a place of immense deliberation and profound spiritual gravity, the sun-baked slopes of Mount Parnassus in ancient Greece, home to the most influential and enigmatic figure in the classical world, the Oracle of Delphi. For over 1,000 years, this was the absolute epicenter of the known universe, the very navel of the world. Kings and commoners, generals and philosophers, all made the arduous pilgrimage up the sacred way, bearing lavish gifts and burning questions, all to seek the counsel of a single, ordinary woman who, in a state of divine intoxication, was believed to become the literal mouthpiece of the god Apollo. The process of consulting the oracle was a meticulously choreographed ritual, far from a simple walk-in appointment. A petitioner, after making the appropriate sacrifices and paying a significant fee, would be led into the inner sanctum of the temple of Apollo, the Odin. This was a small, subterranean chamber, often described as having a distinct sweet and earthy smell. At its center sat the Pythia, the title given to the priestess of Apollo. She was not a mysterious sorceress, but typically a local, respectable woman of mature years from a nearby village who had lived a blameless life. Her preparation was a ritual in itself. She would bathe in the sacred Castalian spring, drink water from a sacred stream, and chew laurel leaves, a plant sacred to Apollo. Then she would take her seat on a tall, three-legged stool, the tripod, positioned directly over a chasm in the rocky floor. And here is where the ancient accounts and modern science converge on a truly bizarre reality. From this fissure in the earth, geological gases would seep forth. For centuries, this was thought to be mere legend, but modern geological surveys of the site have confirmed that two fault lines crossed directly beneath the temple, and in the past they likely emitted ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas that is a potent psychoactive agent. As the Pythia inhaled these fumes, a dramatic transformation would overtake her. The respectable village woman would begin to shudder and writhe, her eyes rolling back in her head. She would slip into a profound, delirious trance, a state the Greeks called enthousiasmos, literally, having a god within. From her lips would come guttural cries, incoherent babble, and fragmented phrases. This was not the clear, poetic prophecy we might imagine. Her utterances were wild, chaotic, and often terrifying to behold. It then fell to the temple priests who stood by her side during the entire ordeal to interpret these raw, divine ravings. They would translate her ecstatic gibberish into the elegant and famously ambiguous hexameter verses that were delivered to the waiting petitioner. A king asking if he should go to war might receive the answer, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." He would assume it meant his enemy's empire, only to discover too late that the empire destined to fall was his own. The logic that defies our modern, data-driven mindset is staggering in its scale and consequence. The entire Greek world, a civilization that gave us the foundations of rational philosophy, democracy, and empirical science, simultaneously operated on the unwavering belief that the most critical decisions of state, the founding of new colonies across the Mediterranean, the timing of military campaigns, the passing of laws should be based on the interpreted ravings of a drugged priestess. They were convinced that through this specific chemical ritual, the veil between the mortal and divine was torn, and Apollo himself was speaking directly to them. The power of this belief cannot be overstated. A favorable prophecy could embolden a tiny city-state to stand against a Persian army of millions, as it did for the Athenians before the Battle of Salamis. An ambiguous one could sow the seeds of a dynasty's destruction. The entire political and military landscape of the ancient Mediterranean was in many ways shaped by the hallucinations of the Pythia, filtered through the careful interpretation of her priestly handlers. This was not seen as superstition. It was the highest form of intelligence gathering, a direct hotline to the divine plan. The ritual's power lay in this perfect synthesis of the tangible and the mystical. The very real geological phenomenon of the gases created a physical, observable alteration in a human being, which was then framed by an unshakable cultural and religious narrative. For the Greeks, the bizarre and frightening spectacle was the proof. The more distorted and inhuman the Pythia's state appeared, the more convinced they were that a true God was present, overriding her mortal mind and speaking a truth that was far greater and far more dangerous than any mere human counsel. Yet, the logic that seems so shocking to an outsider is, for a Tibetan Buddhist, the ultimate expression of compassion and spiritual wisdom. The harsh geography of the Tibetan plateau makes this practice not just pragmatic but deeply philosophical. The ground is often frozen solid or too rocky for burial. Trees are so scarce that cremation, a common practice elsewhere in the Buddhist world, is a luxury reserved only for the highest lamas. A sky burial is therefore the most practical and ecologically sound method available, but it transcends mere utility. Tibetan Buddhism teaches the impermanence of all things, including the body, which is seen as an empty vessel once the consciousness has departed. Clinging to that vessel, spending resources to preserve it in the ground or through fire, is viewed as a manifestation of attachment, a fundamental source of suffering that hinders spiritual progress. By willingly offering one's body to the vultures, a person performs their final and greatest act of generosity, known as dana. They are using their own physical form to sustain other living beings, creating a powerful karmic merit that is believed to aid the soul's journey through the bardo, the intermediate state between death and rebirth. The vultures, far from being symbols of defilement, are seen as Dakini's sky dancing goddesses who carry the soul up towards the heavens, purifying it and releasing it from the attachments of the earthly realm. The body, in this final sacred transaction, becomes a gift, and its complete dissolution is not an erasure but a transformation, a final lesson in letting go that serves both the deceased and the entire cycle of life. While the Oracle of Delphi spoke with the voice of a god, the rituals of the Spartan agoge were designed to forge young boys into living weapons for the state, and few ceremonies were more brutal or defining than the flagellation at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. Picture a scene of stark contrast, a sacred space dedicated to a goddess, yet filled not with prayerful silence but with the sharp crack of whips and the stifled gasps of children. This was the Diamastagosis, an annual contest where Spartan boys, typically between the ages of 12 and 19, were subjected to a horrific ordeal of public whipping on the goddess's altar. The rules were simple, savage, and absolute. Each boy was expected to endure as many lashings as possible without uttering a single cry of pain. The one who withstood the longest and remained silent was declared the winner, earning not just a victor's crown but immense lifelong honor and a special place in the rigid Spartan hierarchy. The whipping was so severe that historical accounts, particularly from later Roman tourists who witnessed it as a morbid spectator sport, describe the altar becoming slick with blood, and there are references to boys occasionally being whipped to death, their lifeless bodies carried from the site as a testament to their failure, or, from the Spartan perspective, their ultimate sacrifice. The purpose of this ritualized torture was the complete and total inversion of a boy's fundamental instincts. In a society that viewed personal comfort and emotional expression as a poison to the collective strength of the polis, the flagellation was the ultimate crucible. Its goal was to burn away any last vestiges of childhood weakness, to sear into the adolescent psyche the principle that loyalty to Sparta trumped every personal feeling, including the most basic human desire to avoid pain. A boy who could stand motionless and silent while being flayed alive was demonstrating that he had achieved perfect enkrataya, self-mastery. He had proven that his mind could completely dominate his body, that his will was stronger than his nerve endings. This was not seen as child abuse. It was the final, essential exam in a years-long curriculum of state-sponsored hardening. From the age of 7, a Spartan boy was removed from his family and lived in a military barracks, subjected to constant drills, scant rations, and a life of deprivation designed to build resilience. The flagellation at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia was the capstone event, the public proof that this training had been successful. It created a warrior who would not break rank no matter the terror of battle, who would stand his ground even with grievous wounds, and who would value the honor of his unit above his own survival. The logic that so thoroughly defies our modern understanding of child rearing and human rights is rooted in the unique, terrifying social contract of Sparta. Unlike their Athenian rivals who valued philosophy, art, and individual expression, the Spartans had constructed a society that functioned like a single, perfect, and perpetually poised military machine. Their entire civilization was predicated on the control of a vastly larger population of enslaved helots who outnumbered them perhaps 10 to 1. The constant, simmering threat of a slave rebellion meant that every Spartan citizen had to be a flawless soldier. There was no room for error, no space for sentimentality. The brutalization of their young was not an act of cruelty for its own sake, but a calculated, coldly pragmatic investment in national security. The agony of one boy on the altar was believed to prevent the potential slaughter of thousands in a helot uprising. This belief system transformed the ritual from torture into a sacred duty. The altar of Artemis Orthia was the focal point where the individual was ritually dismantled and reassembled as a component of the state. The boy's suffering was an offering to the goddess, a payment in pain for her continued favor and protection over Sparta. To cry out was not just a personal failure, it was a spiritual and political transgression, a sign that you were unfit to be a guardian of the most perfect society the Greeks believed had ever existed. The spectacle served another, equally important purpose. It desensitized the entire community to violence and suffering. By making this brutal contest a public event, Spartans of all ages were conditioned to see extreme endurance as normal, admirable, and necessary. It reinforced the cultural DNA that held the collective so far above the individual that a child's death under the lash could be framed not as a tragedy, but as a useful weeding out of the unfit. This worldview, where the path to creating an elite warrior and a stable society was paved with the deliberate, ritualized torture of children, remains one of the most challenging and alien concepts to emerge from the ancient world, a stark reminder that our definitions of strength, virtue, and civilization are not universal constants, but are profoundly shaped by the brutal necessity. Survival. After witnessing the Spartan pursuit of an invulnerable warrior and the Tibetan embrace of bodily dissolution, we now arrive at a ritual that takes our relationship with death and turns it into a vibrant, sweet, and communal celebration. Welcome to Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and specifically to its most iconic and to outsiders paradoxical symbol, the sugar skull or calavera. Imagine walking through a bustling market in the days leading up to the festival. The air is thick with the scent of marigolds and copal incense, but also with the unmistakable, sugary aroma of melting sugar. Artisans are carefully pouring hot, liquid sugar into intricately carved molds, and what emerges are not grim reminders of mortality, but whimsical, brightly decorated candy skulls, adorned with swirling patterns of royal icing in dazzling pinks, blues, and yellows, often with a name written right across the forehead. And here is the ritual's most beautifully bizarre twist. That name inscribed on the candy skull is often not the name of a deceased ancestor, but the name of a living friend or family member. This act, creating a candy effigy of a human skull, labeling it with the name of someone still alive, and then happily eating it, is a cultural concept that completely inverts the somber, fearful relationship with death common in many parts of the world. In most Western traditions, the skull is a stark symbol of danger, poison, or the finality of the grave. To hand a loved one a candy version of their own skull would be seen as a threat or a morbid joke in poor taste. But within the logic of Dia de los Muertos, this is an act of profound affection and philosophical wisdom. The ritual is part of a much larger, joyous celebration where families build elaborate altars or ofrendas in their homes, laden with the favorite foods, drinks, and possessions of departed relatives. They believe that on these nights, the veil between the worlds of the living and the dead grows thin, and the souls of their loved ones return to visit, to feast, and to enjoy the company of the family once more. The entire community comes together not to mourn, but to throw a massive, colorful party for the dead, complete with music, parades, and laughter. The sugar skull fits perfectly into this festive, welcoming atmosphere. By making death into something sweet, colorful, and familiar, the ritual achieves several things at once. First, it is a way of mocking death itself, of taking away its power to frighten. The Spanish phrase for this is dar calavera, which means to skull someone, to pull their leg or tease them. Giving a friend a sugar skull with their name on it is a playful, cheeky way of saying, "I see you, and I know that one day you too will die, and that's okay." It's nothing to be afraid of. This familiarity with mortality is a core tenet of the philosophy behind the holiday. Secondly, by consuming the sugar skull, you are literally taking a symbol of death into your body and transforming it into energy and life. It is a physical, gustatory act of internalizing the cycle of life and death, a sweet reminder that the two are inextricably linked and that one cannot exist without the other. The sugar skull, beautiful and temporary, is a metaphor for life itself, bright, sweet, intricately decorated, and ultimately fleeting. You enjoy its beauty and its taste fully in the moment, knowing it will not last, and that very impermanence is what makes the experience so precious. The vibrant, intricate art of the sugar skull is itself a form of ritual. The decoration is not random. The colorful floral patterns often represent the marigold or cempasúchil, whose vibrant orange petals and powerful scent are believed to guide the wandering souls back to their altars. Other designs can include hearts to represent life or tears to symbolize the sadness of the living, but these are always presented within a joyful, artistic whole. This creates a stunning visual landscape during the festival, where entire towns are awash in color, and cemeteries become places of life filled with music, picnics, and storytelling. The logic that defies our modern sensibilities is one of radical inclusion. In a culture that often tries to sanitize and hide death, Dia de los Muertos and its sugar skulls bring it directly into the center of the community and the home. The departed are not gone and forgotten. They are invited guests of honor at an annual family reunion. The sugar skull is a sweet, edible invitation, a name tag for the great banquet of existence, and a delicious, tangible way to remember that those we love are never truly gone as long as we remember them, celebrate them, and are unafraid to laugh even in the face of our own mortality. Now we move from the intimate family altars of Mexico to the vast, cedar-scented coastlines of the Pacific Northwest, where a ritual of staggering generosity and deliberate destruction once defined the very fabric of society. This is the potlatch, a ceremony practiced by the indigenous peoples of the region, including the Kwakwaka'wakwa, Haida, and Tlingit. Imagine a scene of immense communal gathering that could last for days. A powerful chief stands before hundreds, even thousands of guests from rival and allied clans. Instead of boasting about his riches, he begins to give them all away. Piles of finely woven cedar bark blankets, so high they resemble small hills, are distributed to every guest according to their rank. Elaborately carved chests filled with Yulachan oil, a precious commodity sometimes called grease but valued like gold, are opened and shared. But the spectacle goes far beyond simple gift-giving. The chief's attendants might take a beautifully crafted, seaworthy canoe, a vessel representing immense practical and artistic value, and set it ablaze, pushing it into the water to burn to ashes before the eyes of the entire assembly. They might then bring forward a shield-like object known as a coppers, a massive, beaten plaque of native copper that was the ultimate symbol of wealth, each with its own name and history. In an act that would make a banker faint, the chief would then take this copper, a treasure worth thousands of blankets, and deliberately break it or cast it into the sea, destroying its material value forever in a single, symbolic act of supreme power. To any society built on the principles of accumulation and investment, this looks like economic insanity, a wanton destruction of hard-earned capital. But within the intricate social and spiritual world of the Pacific Northwest, this was the highest form of logic. The potlatch was not an act of waste. It was a sophisticated and deeply competitive system of banking, governance, and spiritual affirmation, all rolled into one spectacular performance. In a culture where wealth was not measured by what you kept in a vault but by what you could distribute to others, status was earned through glorious public expenditure. The word potlatch itself comes from a Chinook jargon word meaning to give. A chief's power and authority were directly proportional to his capacity for generosity. By giving away or destroying immense amounts of wealth, he was providing for his people, honoring his guests, and most importantly, demonstrating his spiritual strength and the favor of the supernatural beings who provided the bounty of the land and sea. He was essentially making a public deposit into his social standing. Every blanket given away, every canoe burned, was a testament to his ability to command resources and his confidence that his lineage, through hard work and divine favor, would be able to generate even more. The guests who received these gifts were not merely passive beneficiaries. They were witnesses to this display of power, and in accepting the gifts, they entered into a solemn obligation. They were now in the chief's debt, and social pressure would compel them to host an even grander potlatch in the future, where they would have to give back gifts of even greater value. This created a perpetual, circulating engine of wealth and status that bound the communities together in a web of reciprocal obligation and competition. The destruction of the most valuable items, like the coppers and canoes, was the ultimate power move in this high-stakes game. It was a declaration so profound that it defies capitalist logic entirely. By destroying a copper, a chief was demonstrating that his wealth and his connection to the spiritual sources of that wealth were so vast, so unshakable, that he could afford to obliterate his single most valuable possession and still remain powerful. It was the equivalent of setting a stack of million-dollar bills on fire to prove you have an infinite supply. This act, known as flattening or breaking a copper, was the pinnacle of potlatch rivalry. It was a challenge thrown down to rival chiefs, a statement that could not be answered with mere gift-giving, but only by destroying an even more valuable named copper. The entire system was a brilliant mechanism for redistributing wealth across the region, ensuring that no single chief or family could hoard resources to the detriment of others, and it cemented social hierarchies not through force, but through publicly validated acts of generosity and spiritual potency. The arrival of European colonizers and the Canadian government, who saw only senseless destruction and a barrier to assimilation, led to the potlatch being outlawed for decades. This ban was a catastrophic attack on the very core of these cultures, as it criminalized their system of law, history-keeping, and identity. Yet, the practice was driven underground, and since the ban was lifted in the 1950s, has undergone a powerful resurgence. Today, potlatches are once again vital ceremonies where families pass down names, rights to songs and dances, and affirm their place in a living tradition that continues to challenge our most basic assumptions about wealth, power, and the true meaning of value. After exploring rituals that transformed the body through endurance or sacrifice, we now encounter a ceremony that targeted the very essence of identity and physical being with a single, irrevocable act. Journey with us back to the bustling, cosmopolitan streets of ancient Rome, where among the many imported cults and deities, one of the most shocking and revered was that of Cybele, the Great Mother. And at the heart of her worship were her dedicated priests, the Galli, whose initiation rite remains one of the most extreme and logic-defying acts of devotion ever recorded. This was not a ritual performed in a secluded temple, but a public spectacle of faith that challenged every Roman convention of masculinity, gender, and bodily integrity. The ceremony took place during the vibrant, chaotic festival of Cybele known as the Day of Blood. Imagine a crowd swept up in a frenzy of ecstatic dancing, fueled by the relentless, hypnotic beat of drums and the sharp wail of flutes, all under the intoxicating influence of wine. In the midst of this collective hysteria, a new initiate, having dedicated himself to the goddess, would reach a peak of spiritual euphoria. In this heightened state, disconnected from the pain of the mundane world, he would perform the ultimate act of devotion. Seizing a sharp, jagged piece of flint or pottery, a deliberately crude instrument linking the act to a primal, ancient world, he would publicly castrate himself. The visual shock of this self-mutilation, performed in a moment of divine madness, was the core of the ritual. It was a visceral, bloody offering presented directly to the Great Mother. The aftermath of this act was just as transformative as the act itself. The initiate did not seek to hide his new state or live in shame. Instead, he embraced a completely new identity. From that day forward, he would live his life as a woman. He would adopt female attire, often wearing the distinctive long, saffron-yellow robes and a turreted crown symbolizing Cybele's role as protector of cities. He would wear elaborate makeup, style his hair in feminine fashions, and even adopt a female name. These Galli priests then became central figures in the cult, traveling in groups, offering prophecies in high-pitched voices, and begging for alms, their existence a constant, walking testament to the power of their goddess. Roman statues and artifacts depict the Galli with soft, often effeminate features, their robes and accessories clearly marking their unique and sacred status in the religious landscape. The logic that defies our every modern understanding is found in the powerful myth that inspired this practice. The story tells of Cybele's beloved consort, Attis, a handsome mortal youth. In a fit of madness, either as punishment for his infidelity or to preserve his purity, Attis fled to the mountains and castrated himself under a pine tree, bleeding to death at its roots. Cybele, in her grief, pleaded with the king of the gods to preserve him, and he was granted a form of immortality, with his spirit resurrected each spring. The Galli, through their act of self-castration, were symbolically reenacting the death of Attis. They were offering the goddess the most potent sacrifice imaginable: their fertility, their potential for lineage, their very manhood, as a way to participate directly in this cycle of death and rebirth. Their physical mutilation was not seen as a loss but as a spiritual rebirth. By shedding the physical markers of their masculinity, they were believed to have transcended the boundaries of gender, becoming sacred, liminal beings wholly dedicated to the Great Mother. This act granted them immense religious authority, as they were seen as living embodiments of the myth, their very bodies a permanent sacrifice that gave them the power to interpret the goddess's will and mediate between her and the common people. In the hyper-masculine, patriarchal world of Rome, where political and social power was intrinsically tied to male virility and the founding of families, the existence of the galley was a profound paradox. They were simultaneously revered for their extreme piety and often looked down upon for their rejection of Roman masculine norms. Yet their cult thrived, a testament to a form of devotion so absolute that it required the surrender of one's former self, a belief system where the path to the divine was paved not with self-preservation, but with a willing, public, and permanent act of self-unmaking. From the complex social engineering of the Spartan agoge, we turn now to a living ritual where faith appears to create a literal shield against one of nature's most fundamental forces. In a handful of villages in northern Greece every year, a tradition unfolds that seems to suspend the very laws of physics. This is the Anastenaria, a fire-walking ceremony where participants, in a state of profound ecstatic trance, dance barefoot across a bed of glowing hot wood embers, emerging completely unscathed. The scene is both primal and deeply spiritual. A large fire is built and allowed to burn down for hours until it becomes a searing carpet of orange and red coals, radiating an intense heat that pushes back the night and forces onlookers to shield their faces. The air thrums with the hypnotic, driving rhythm of lyres and drums, a melody passed down through generations that is believed to hold the key to the trance state. Then the chosen participants, the Anastenarides, begin to move. Their eyes are often glazed or rolled back, their movements fluid yet purposeful, as if guided by an invisible hand. They are not merely walking, they are dancing, stepping, and skipping across the fiery expanse, sometimes carrying sacred icons of Saint Constantine and Saint Helen, their bare feet making direct, sustained contact with embers that should, by all scientific reasoning, cause third-degree burns. The core belief that empowers this ritual is one of divine possession and protection. The Anastenarides are not seen as performing a feat of endurance, but as vessels for the saints themselves. The entire community believes that the dancers enter a state of ecstasy or ecstasy, during which their own consciousness is set aside and the spirit of the saint enters their body. It is this divine inhabitant, this sacred force, that is believed to be what truly walks across the fire, rendering the physical body invulnerable to the flames. The ritual is a test of faith, but not in the way an outsider might think. It is not about the individual dancer's personal belief in their own safety, but about the collective faith of the entire village in the power and presence of the saint. A dancer who is burned is not thought to have had weak faith, but rather the community may interpret it as a sign that the ritual was not performed correctly, that the trance was not pure, or that there was some form of spiritual impurity present. The logic is beautifully circular and self-reinforcing. A successful firewalk is a visible miracle that strengthens communal faith, and that strengthened faith, in turn, is what makes the next miracle possible. This transforms the ritual from a spectacle into a vital, communal spiritual practice, a direct physical interaction with the divine that reaffirms the identity and cohesion of the village. Of course, to the modern, scientifically minded observer, this cries out for a rational explanation, and physics provides several compelling ones that are just as fascinating as the spiritual interpretation. The primary factor is the surprisingly low thermal conductivity of wood embers and charcoal. Unlike a piece of heated metal, which would transfer its heat to human skin with devastating speed and efficiency, the carbon structure of the embers is a poor conductor. This means the heat does not instantly flood into the foot. The second crucial factor is the short duration of contact. The dancers do not stroll, they move with quick, light dancing steps, ensuring that any single point on their foot is in contact with a burning ember for only a fraction of a second. Furthermore, the ashes that coat the embers act as an additional insulating layer. There is also a psychological component. The trance state itself, often accompanied by a massive release of endorphins and adrenaline, may alter pain perception and allow for a level of focus that prevents the panicked, prolonged contact that would cause real injury. From a purely physical standpoint, it is a perfectly explainable phenomenon involving specific materials and precise technique. Yet, to focus solely on the physics is to miss the entire point of the ritual, and this is where the anastenaria truly defies logic from our modern perspective. For the participants and the community, the scientific explanation is irrelevant, even insulting. They have witnessed the burning fire with their own eyes. They have felt its heat from meters away. They know on a fundamental level that what they are doing should be impossible, and that is precisely why it is a miracle. The scientific principles of thermal conductivity are not seen as the cause of their safety, but merely as the mundane conditions through which a higher, divine power chooses to operate. The trance is not a psychological trick to manage pain. It is the necessary state for opening a channel to the saint. The quick steps are not a clever technique to avoid burns, but the physical expression of the ecstatic dance inspired by the divine presence. The two explanations, the spiritual and the scientific, exist on parallel tracks that never truly meet. For the physicist, the miracle is demystified into a neat set of physical laws. For the anastenarides, the very existence of those physical laws is what makes the suspension of them so powerful. Their faith does not deny the reality of the fire, it transcends it. The ritual is a living, breathing paradox, a testament to a worldview where belief is not an abstract concept, but a tangible force that can, for a few moments on a village square, make the impossible not only possible, but a regular, expected, and celebrated annual event. And from the ecstatic fires of Greece, we journey now to the lush, green, and mist-shrouded hills of northeast India and Myanmar, where an entirely different kind of ritual power was sought, one harvested not from trance but from the battlefield. Here, among the Naga people, headhunting was not an act of wanton brutality, but a deeply sacred and essential practice woven into the very fabric of their spiritual and agricultural life. For the Naga warrior, the ultimate trophy was the head of an enemy, but this grim prize was not taken as a simple proof of valor. It was collected as a vital spiritual resource, a vessel containing the soul and life force of the deceased, which was then ceremonially harnessed for the benefit of the entire village. The ritual began the moment a warrior successfully ambushed a foe from a rival village. The head, once severed, was not hidden or disposed of, but treated with a mixture of reverence and triumph. It was carefully prepared for the journey home, often wrapped and carried in a special basket. As the warrior and his party approached their own village, they would announce their success with triumphant cries, and the entire community would erupt in celebration. The head was welcomed not as a gruesome spoil of war, but as a powerful, captured entity. It would be paraded through the village, sometimes placed on a ceremonial platform or a skull tree at the village entrance, a stark and potent display of the community's spiritual and martial strength. Elaborate feasts would be held, and the warrior who took the head was celebrated as a hero, earning a prestigious tattoo or the right to wear specific ornaments that marked his achievement for the rest of his life. The head itself was often given a place of honor. The skull might be cleaned and preserved, integrated into the architecture of the warrior's house or the village men's house, serving as a permanent guardian and a source of spiritual power. The logic that makes this practice so profoundly alien to the modern mind lies in the Naga worldview, where human life force was a tangible energy that could be transferred and managed. They believed that the soul, with all its vitality, courage, and strength, resided most powerfully in the head. By taking the head of a strong, courageous enemy, the warrior and his village were not just defeating a rival, they were capturing and appropriating that enemy's spiritual essence. This captured life force was then channeled for two critical communal purposes. The first and most vital was ensuring agricultural fertility. The Naga were primarily an agrarian society, and their survival depended on the success of their crops. They believed that the human life force contained in a severed head was the most potent fertilizer imaginable for the soul of the land. The energy of the slain would be ritually transferred to the soil, guaranteeing bountiful harvests of rice and ensuring the community would not face famine. It was a brutal form of sympathetic magic. As the head had been a source of life and energy for its original owner, so too would it now become a source of life and energy for the crops. The second purpose was spiritual and social fortification. A village that displayed numerous skulls was not just displaying its military prowess, it was broadcasting its immense reservoir of accumulated spiritual power. Each skull added to the collection strengthened the village's protective aura, warding off malevolent spirits and diseases. It bolstered the collective courage and virility of the men, making them more successful in future hunts and battles. The head-taking ritual was, therefore, a sacred duty, a necessary and cyclical act of violence that fueled the very engine of life for the community. It transformed the act of killing from a destructive impulse into a creative, generative force. The warrior was not a murderer but a provider, a priest of a bloody harvest that sustained his people. This belief system created a self-perpetuating cycle of ritualized conflict, where raids were conducted not for land or material wealth, but to replenish this vital spiritual resource. The practice began to decline under British colonial rule in the 19th century, which viewed it as the height of savagery and has since faded away entirely. Yet, the legacy of headhunting remains deeply embedded in Naga culture, reflected in their vibrant oral histories, their intricate ceremonial attire adorned with animal tusks and hornbill feathers, symbols of status once earned through head-taking, and in the lingering respect for the ancestors who performed these rituals not out of cruelty, but out of a profound and, from their perspective, completely logical devotion to the survival and prosperity of their world. And now, we witness a phenomenon born not in the deep past, but in the living memory of the 20th century, a story that reveals how quickly a new religion can spring from the ashes of a world war, and how the collision of two utterly different realities can create a ritual that is both heartbreakingly logical and utterly baffling. This is the world of the cargo cults of Melanesia. Picture the scene on a remote, idyllic island in the South Pacific during the Second World War. For generations, life had followed a timeless rhythm, governed by the cycles of the sea and the land, and by the spirits of the ancestors. Then, with no warning, the sky began to roar. Giant silver birds descended from the clouds, landing on vast, flattened strips of earth that thousands of foreign soldiers had magically carved from the jungle. These soldiers, who were mostly white men, did not farm, hunt, or fish. They simply performed strange, repetitive actions, marching in lines, talking into boxes, waving colored flags, and in return, an unimaginable torrent of wealth poured forth from the bellies of the great birds and the huge ships that arrived on their shores. There were mountains of canned food, stacks of colorful clothing, vehicles that moved without being pulled, and tools of every description. The islanders watched as this cargo, as they called it, was unloaded and distributed, seemingly created from nothing by these mysterious visitors. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the soldiers packed up and left. The airstrips fell silent, the ships vanished over the horizon, and the flow of miraculous cargo ceased. The islanders were left with the memory of this incredible abundance, a glimpse of a paradise of material wealth that had been dangled before them and then snatched away. And so, they did the only thing that made perfect sense from within their own worldview. If the cargo did not come from farming or traditional work, and if the white men had acquired it by performing specific, ritualized behaviors, then the key to unlocking this bounty must lie in carefully mimicking those actions. This was the genesis of the cargo cults, led by charismatic prophets who claimed to have received revelations from the ancestors. Entire villages embarked on an astonishing project of sympathetic magic. Using vines, wood, and bamboo, they built remarkably detailed replicas of the technology they had observed. They constructed life-sized control towers, complete with bamboo headsets and mock microphones. They cleared and maintained elaborate mock airstrips, complete with signal fires lining the runways. They fashioned wooden rifles and paraded in drill formations, imitating the marching soldiers. They even built full-scale airplanes out of straw and palm fronds, carefully positioning them on the runways as if ready for a divine landing. The logic that defies our modern technological understanding is, from their perspective, a flawless chain of reasoning. In traditional Melanesian spirituality, the world of the living is deeply connected to the spirit world of the ancestors who control the bounty of nature. Good harvests, successful hunts, and general prosperity are gifts from the ancestors, earned through correct rituals and observance of taboos. The prophets of the cargo cults preached a powerful new theology. The vast wealth of the white man was not created by him, but was actually cargo intended for the islanders, sent by their own ancestor spirits. The white men, through some trick or spiritual oversight, had managed to intercept this bounty. Therefore, by meticulously recreating the rituals they had seen the soldiers perform, the marching, the radio operations, the airstrip maintenance, they were sending a powerful signal to their ancestors. They were demonstrating that they were ready, that they knew the correct procedures, and that the sacred cargo planes and ships should now be redirected to their villages. The waiting was an act of profound faith. Cult members would often abandon their traditional gardens, believing that to continue farming would show a lack of faith in the imminent arrival of the ancestral cargo. They truly believed that if they performed the rituals perfectly, with enough devotion and precision, the great silver birds would once again descend, this time filled with gifts for them. This was not an act of stupidity or primitive confusion. It was a brilliant, creative, and entirely rational attempt to make sense of an overwhelming and incomprehensible technological civilization. They had correctly observed the correlation between the soldiers' actions and the arrival of the cargo, but they lacked the underlying knowledge of global manufacturing, supply chains, and economics to understand the causation. Their response was to build a new religious framework that incorporated these new, powerful gods and their rituals into their existing spiritual landscape. Archival photographs and footage from the period are simultaneously poignant and surreal, showing earnest men wearing carved wooden headphones and sitting in bamboo watchtowers, scanning the empty horizon for planes that would never come. The most famous of these cults, the John Frum cult on the island of Tanna in Vanuatu, even prophesied that John Frum, a mythical American figure, would return one day bringing a new age of prosperity. The endurance of these beliefs, with some variations of the cargo cult still existing today, stands as a powerful testament to the human need for meaning, and a stark reminder that one culture's objective reality can be another culture's divine mystery. It represents one of history's most dramatic and recent examples of a lost ritual being born, a faith built from the wreckage of war, centered on the desperate, logical, and ultimately heartbreaking hope that if you build it, the cargo will come. Transitioning from the desperate, mimetic faith of the cargo cults, we arrive at a ritual of profound, ancient, and deeply personal sacrifice, one where the offering is not an object, but the very flesh and endurance of the participant. This is the Sun Dance, the most significant and spiritually potent ceremony for the Plains Indian nations, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Crow. Far from being a spectacle of mere endurance, it was, and for many still is, a complex and beautiful tapestry of prayer, community, and cosmic renewal, centered on a single, sacred axis, the cottonwood tree. The entire ceremony was a multi-day communal undertaking, a powerful gathering that reaffirmed the bonds between the people, the land, and the Great Spirit Wakon Tanka. The first and most sacred act was the felling of the cottonwood tree, selected for its fork at the top, which represented a bird's nest and the connection between heaven and earth. This was not a simple act of logging, it was a ceremonial hunt. Warriors on horseback would charge the tree, counting coup upon it as if it were a noble enemy. Once it was felled with great reverence, it was carefully carried, never allowed to touch the ground, and erected at the very center of the dance arbor, a circular lodge open to the sky. This tree became the axis mundi, the center of the world, a conduit connecting the dancers to the divine. For days, participants would dance in a circular path around this tree, their eyes fixed upon its top, their feet pounding the earth in rhythm with the drum and the songs of the community. They blew on eagle bone whistles, their sharp cries representing the voices of the spirits, all while fasting from both food and water under the relentless heat of the summer sun. This physical ordeal was itself a form of prayer, a deliberate stripping away of worldly comforts to achieve a state of spiritual purity and heightened awareness. Yet the most intense and logic-defying aspect of the sun dance, particularly in the Lakota tradition, involved a supreme act of self-sacrifice known as the piercing. Men who had made a sacred vow would undergo a physical ordeal that seems unimaginable. The holy man would take two sharp wooden skewers, often made from sage stems, and pierce them through the skin and muscle of the dancer's chest or sometimes his back. Leather thongs or ropes were then tied to these skewers, with the other ends secured high up on the sacred center pole. The dancer, thus tethered to the axis of the world, would then begin to dance, leaning back with all his weight against the ropes, pulling against the skewers embedded in his flesh. He would continue this agonizing dance, staring at the sun, blowing his eagle bone whistle and praying fervently until the skewers finally tore their way through his flesh and broke free. To a modern viewer, this appears to be an act of extreme masochism or self-torture. But within the spiritual logic of the Plains Indians, this was the ultimate, most powerful form of prayer. The pain was not the point, it was the offering. In a world where survival was precarious and the well-being of the tribe was paramount, an individual's suffering was seen as a potent currency that could be exchanged for divine favor. By willingly offering his body in this way, the dancer was performing a sacred transaction. His pain was a prayer for the healing of a sick relative, for the success of the buffalo hunt to feed the people, for the coming rains to nourish the earth, or for the protection and renewal of the entire nation. The tearing of the flesh was not a failure, but the successful culmination of the sacrifice, a release. The small pieces of skin and muscle torn away were left as an offering at the base of the sacred tree, a physical piece of the self given for the whole. This act transformed the dancer. Through his sacrifice, he entered a state of visionary transcendence, often receiving powerful dreams or guidance from the spirit world that would benefit his people. His ordeal was a visceral, bloody demonstration of the core principle of interconnectedness, that one person's profound sacrifice could ensure the health, balance, and continued life of the entire community. A beautiful and harrowing testament to a belief system where individual pain was the price of collective salvation. But after witnessing the deeply personal, introspective sacrifice of the sun dance, we are now plunged into a spectacle of overwhelming sensory intensity, a riot of color, sound, and devotion that transforms entire cityscapes into moving temples of faith. This is the Thaipusam festival, a vibrant Hindu celebration observed by Tamil communities across the world, from the bustling streets of Kuala Lumpur and Singapore to the holy caves of Batu in Malaysia and the temples of southern India. At its heart is a ritual that, to the uninitiated eye, appears to be an exhibition of extreme masochism, but for millions of devotees, it is the ultimate expression of gratitude, penance, and spiritual transcendence, centered on the worship of the god Murugan, the divine warrior and son of Shiva. The focal point of this astonishing display is the kavadi, an elaborate, often breathtakingly heavy structure that devotees carry on their shoulders, their bodies transformed into a living canvas of devotion through dozens, sometimes hundreds of piercings. The preparation for this act is as meticulous as it is profound. For weeks or even months in advance, a devotee, known as a kavadi bearer, prepares through strict purification. They adopt a vegetarian diet, abstain from worldly pleasures, sleep on the floor, and engage in constant prayer and meditation, focusing their mind entirely on Lord Murugan. This period is not about building physical strength, but about cultivating bhakti, a state of intense, loving devotion that will allow them to transcend the physical ordeal to come. On the day of the festival, the atmosphere is electric. The air throbs with the hypnotic, incessant chant of Vel Vel Shakti Vel, a mantra invoking Murugan's divine spear. Drums beat a frantic, trance-inducing rhythm, and the smell of incense and flowers is everywhere. It is in this heightened, communal fervor that the devotees begin their transformation. Assisted by spiritual guides and family members, they enter a state of deep trance. Their eyes may glaze over or roll back, their movements becoming fluid and detached from their surroundings. In this altered state of consciousness, the piercings begin. Using long, sharpened metal skewers and hooks, often sterilized in lemon juice or holy ash, the devotee's skin is pierced. It is a sight that defies every expectation. Dozens of vel, or small spears symbolizing Murugan's weapon, are pushed through the cheeks and tongue. Larger hooks are embedded in the skin of the back and chest, from which chains are hung, often connected to the kavadi itself or used to pull small chariots. Fruits like limes and oranges are skewered onto other hooks covering the body. Yet, amidst this forest of metal-piercing flesh, there is a stunning and logic-defying absence. There is typically very little blood, and the devotees show no visible signs of pain. Their faces are serene, even ecstatic, as if they are observing the procedure from a great distance. This is the first great mystery of Taipusam, the apparent anesthesia of faith. Then comes the kavadi itself. These are not simple burdens, they are magnificent portable altars, often towering several feet high, intricately decorated with peacock feathers. Murugan's sacred vehicle, brilliantly colored flowers, religious icons, and jingling bells. Some can weigh over 100 pounds. Once the piercings are complete and the kavadi is hoisted onto their shoulders, the devotee begins the final, grueling pilgrimage. They walk for miles, often barefoot and under the blazing sun, from a starting temple to a hilltop shrine, all while in this profound trance state, dancing and spinning to the rhythm of the drums. The sight of thousands of these pierced, kavadi-bearing devotees moving in a massive, chanting procession is one of the most visually stunning and spiritually charged rituals on the planet. So, what is the logic behind this seemingly extreme and painful display? For the devotees, it is the polar opposite of self-harm. It is a supreme act of spiritual cleansing and a fulfillment of a sacred vow or vratam. A devotee might have prayed to Murugan for a specific boon, the healing of a sick child, success in a business venture, or guidance through a personal crisis. Having received this divine assistance, they pledge to undertake the kavadi as a form of thanksgiving and penance. The physical ordeal is a way of balancing the cosmic scales, of offering something deeply precious in return for the blessing they received, their own comfort and physical well-being. The piercings and the heavy burden are a deliberate, conscious act of mastering the body and the mind. By willingly enduring this physical challenge without succumbing to pain, the devotee demonstrates that the spirit is superior to the flesh. They are proving their detachment from worldly suffering and their absolute, unwavering focus on the divine. The lack of bleeding and pain is not seen as a physiological anomaly, but as tangible proof of Murugan's grace intervening, shielding them from agony as a reward for their profound devotion. Every step of the pilgrimage, every jingle of the bell on their kavadi is a prayer in motion, a physical manifestation of their faith that purifies their soul, burns away past sins, and strengthens their connection to the God who has answered their call. In a world that often avoids discomfort at all costs, Taipusam presents a radical alternative, a belief that true peace and liberation can be found not by avoiding suffering, but by voluntarily embracing it as a sacred offering, transforming the body itself into a moving, breathing, and spectacular testament to the power of faith. From the ecstatic, sun-drenched processions of Taipusam, we now step into the smoky warmth of a rural English pub during the deep midwinter, where a very different yet equally ancient form of ritual drama is about to unfold. Here, the air is thick with the smell of ale and damp wool, and a boisterous crowd gathers as a door swings open to admit a troupe of bizarrely costumed figures. These are the mummers, and their raucous, seemingly nonsensical performance is a surviving thread from a tapestry of belief so old its original pattern has been all but forgotten. Their play, passed down orally through generations, follows a remarkably consistent and strange plot. A hero, most commonly Saint George or the Turkish knight, enters with great bravado, boasting of his valor and prowess. He is soon confronted by a villainous rival, often a boastful soldier like Slasher or a character simply called the Bold Soldier. The two exchange exaggerated threats in a rhythmic, sing-song dialogue before they clash in a mock battle, their swords made of wood clacking loudly together. In a dramatic turn, the hero is struck down and falls to the floor, seemingly dead. The mood then shifts with the entrance of a comical, quack doctor figure, who announces he can cure all ailments with his absurdly enormous pills or miraculous potions. After much buffoonery and a haggling over his fee, the doctor proceeds to revive the fallen hero, often with a theatrical touch or a ludicrous incantation. The dead man leaps to his feet, restored to life, and the play concludes with a collection of money and a celebratory song, while a character like Little Johnny Jack might enter to wish large families upon all the young women in the audience. On the surface, it appears to be a simple, amateurish folk entertainment, a bit of rough holiday fun. But beneath the clumsy swordplay and comic antics lies the ghost of one of humanity's most profound and widespread rituals, the symbolic death and resurrection of a divine king, performed to magically ensure the rebirth of the world itself at the turning of the year. The bizarre logic of the mummers' play makes perfect sense when viewed through the lens of its likely prehistoric pagan origins. Scholars see it as a distant, folkloric echo of ceremonies that would have been deadly serious to the agricultural communities that first conceived them. In the depths of winter, when the sun was at its weakest and the land appeared dead and barren, ancient peoples believed that the vitality of the cosmos needed to be actively regenerated through human action. The death of the hero on the pub floor is a symbolic stand-in for the death of the sun, the spirit of the harvest, or a yearly vegetation god. His resurrection at the hands of the comic doctor is not merely a happy ending, it is a performative act of sympathetic magic. By ritually enacting the return of life from death on a small, human scale, the community believed they could influence the great cycles of nature, compelling the sun to grow stronger and the frozen earth to once again become fertile. The comedic element embodied by the doctor is crucial. Laughter was thought to be a powerful, life-affirming force, a sonic weapon against the gloom and decay of winter. The collective mirth of the audience was as much a part of the ritual as the actors' lines, a wave of human vitality helping to push the wheel of the year back toward spring. This ancient purpose is further hinted at by the mummers themselves and their strange appearance. The tradition of mumming comes from an old word for silence or disguise, and the performers were always heavily disguised, their faces blackened with soot or concealed behind masks of paper or cloth. This anonymity was essential. They were not individuals putting on a show, they were the temporary vessels for archetypal forces, life, death, and rebirth. Their costumes, often made from strips of colorful paper or rags sewn onto their clothes, created a shaggy, otherworldly effect. These rags may be a folk memory of the leafy garments worn by even more ancient nature spirits. The timing of the performances, typically around the winter solstice and the 12 days of Christmas, places them squarely in the calendar of the old agricultural year, a time when the veil between the worlds was thin and magical operations were thought to be most effective. The play was a charm, a spell cast by an entire village, using the familiar language of character and conflict to petition the unseen forces of the universe for what they needed most: light, warmth, and food. The fact that it was performed by amateurs in the heart of the community, the home or the pub rather than by priests in a temple, speaks to its deeply rooted domestic nature. This was not a top-down state religion, but a grassroots folk belief, a ritual so vital that it was kept alive for centuries by common people, its true meaning slowly fading until all that was left was the charming, baffling shell of a play, a ghost of a ritual that once held the power in the minds of its performers to make the sun rise and the crops grow. And now we travel from the boisterous English pub to the cloud-kissed highlands of South Sulawesi, Indonesia, where the very concept of death is turned on its head, and a funeral is not an end but a spectacular, long-awaited beginning. This is the world of the Tana Toraja, an ethnic group whose elaborate funeral rites are among the most complex and logic-defying in the modern world. For the Toraja, death is not a sudden, singular moment of departure. It is a slow, meticulously managed process, a social and spiritual journey that can take months or even years to complete. When a person breathes their last breath, their family does not rush to bury them. Instead, the body is carefully prepared and then brought back into the family home to reside among the living. The deceased is referred to as Tomacula, a person who is sick, or more poetically, one who is asleep. They are treated with the same daily attentiveness as a cherished, ailing relative. Family members will bring them meals, speak to them, and include them in conversation, maintaining their presence within the heart of domestic life. The body is often preserved through traditional methods involving natural herbs and formaldehyde, and for the duration of this waiting period, which can stretch for years, the person is not considered truly dead but merely sleeping, their spirit still lingering within the household. This prolonged liminal state serves a deeply practical and social purpose. A Torajan funeral, known as Rambu Solo, is an astronomically expensive event, a massive feast that requires the entire extended family to save for years. The waiting period allows relatives scattered across the globe time to gather the necessary funds and make the journey home. It transforms death from a private grief into a protracted, communal preparation for a grand public spectacle. The family's social standing is intrinsically tied to the scale and grandeur of the funeral they can host, so the pressure to orchestrate an impressive ceremony is immense. During this time, the deceased is part of the family's life in a very tangible way, a constant, silent participant in the planning of their own final send-off. When the family's resources are finally assembled, the waiting ends and the Rambu Solo begins. This is not a somber, quiet affair. It is a cacophonous, vibrant, and often gruesome festival that can last for nearly a week, drawing hundreds, sometimes thousands of guests. The central focus of the entire event is the sacrifice of water buffalo, known as tedong. These are not ordinary livestock. They are specially bred, prized animals, often albino buffalo with unique spotting patterns, each one representing a significant financial investment. The ceremony takes place in a vast, temporary field with the deceased's body, now placed in a colorfully decorated tiered tower presiding over the spectacle. One by one, the buffalo are led into the center of the gathering. In a swift and solemn act, a designated master sacrificer wields a massive parang or machete, and with a single, powerful blow severs the animal's carotid artery. The ground soon turns to mud and blood as dozens, and for high-ranking nobles, sometimes hundreds of these magnificent creatures are slaughtered. the logic behind this staggering display of wealth and life is what utterly defies our modern Western sensibilities. The Toraja believe that the soul of the deceased cannot begin its long and arduous journey to the afterlife, a realm known as Puya, without a retinue and the proper provisions. The buffalo are not merely offerings, they are spiritual vehicles and currency. Each buffalo sacrificed is believed to carry the sole part of the way on its journey, speeding its ascent. The more buffalo that are slaughtered, the faster and more comfortably the soul will travel, and the higher its status will be upon arrival in Puya. The horns of the sacrificed buffalo are then stacked high on a pole in front of the family's traditional house, the iconic tonkonen with its sweeping, boat-shaped roof. This display of horns is a permanent public ledger of the family's wealth, piety, and social standing, a testament to the immense price they were willing to pay to secure a better position for their loved one in the next world. It is a transaction of breathtaking scale where earthly wealth is converted directly into spiritual capital, but the ceremony does not end with the feasting and the sacrifices. The final act in this long ritual is the burial itself, and here the Toraja defiance of logic continues in a visually stunning way. Because the land is considered precious for agriculture, traditional ground burials are uncommon. Instead, the deceased are laid to rest in cliffs. The Toraja craft life-sized wooden effigies called Tau Tau, carved in the likeness of the deceased, which are placed in balconies carved high into the rock face, watching eternally over the living in the valley below. In some areas, particularly the village of Limo, you can see entire galleries of these Tau Tau staring out from a sheer stone wall, a silent community of the remembered. For infants, a different, even more poignant practice was once observed. Babies who died before cutting their teeth were buried inside the hollows of living trees. The belief was that the tree, as it continued to grow, would absorb the infant's pure spirit, a gentle and natural form of reintegration with the cycle of life. This entire worldview, from the years of treating a corpse as a sleeping family member to the climactic, bloody feast and the final ascent to a cliffside grave, presents a reality where death is not a wall but a bridge. It is a process managed by the community, financed by the family, and accelerated by sacrifice, a profound and continuous negotiation between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors, where the boundaries between the two are not fixed but fluid, celebrated, and eternally honored. And so we arrive at our final destination on this journey through history's strangest rites, a ritual that unfolds not in a dark forest or on a bloody altar, but on the shimmering, sun-drenched waters of the Venetian lagoon. This was the Sposalizio del Mare, the marriage of the sea, an annual spectacle of such breathtaking opulence and political genius that it perfectly encapsulates the unique spirit of the serene Republic of Venice. Each year, on the Catholic Feast of the Ascension, the city would transform into a floating theater of power. The centerpiece was the Bucentoro, the Doge's magnificent state barge. This was no ordinary vessel, it was a floating palace, a gilded leviathan over 100 feet long, powered by 168 oarsmen. Its hull was a masterpiece of carved allegorical figures, its cabins draped in crimson silk and cloth of gold, a blazing symbol of Venetian wealth and naval supremacy. The Doge, clad in his robes of office and seated on a throne of ivory and gold, would board this maritime throne room, accompanied by the entire Venetian Senate, foreign ambassadors, and a retinue of the city's most powerful nobles. To the sound of trumpets and the cheers of the populace crowding the canals and rooftops, the great barge would glide in a stately procession out of the basin of St. Mark's, past the Lido, and into the open waters of the Adriatic Sea. At the moment of highest ceremony, with the vast blue expanse stretching to the horizon, the Patriarch of Venice would bless a simple, heavy gold ring. The Doge would then rise, take the ring, and cast it into the churning water with the solemn declaration, De sponsamus te mare insignum veri perpetuic domini. This translates to, "We wed thee, O sea, in token of our true and perpetual dominion." The act was both a declaration of love and a statement of brutal ownership. Venice was not merely a city by the sea, it was a city married to the sea. Its entire existence, its staggering wealth, its empire of trading posts that stretched to Constantinople and Alexandria, all of it flowed from the maritime trade routes it commanded. The ring was a wedding band, a symbol of a sacred, permanent union. But it was also a token of subjugation, the seal on a contract of domination, personifying the sea as a spouse to be cherished, honored, and most importantly, controlled. The logic that defies our modern understanding is found in this brilliant, symbolic fusion of politics, religion, and pure theater. In an age without mass media, the Venetian state understood that power had to be performed, and its identity had to be ritually reaffirmed for both its citizens and its rivals. The ceremony transformed abstract economic and military realities into a tangible, emotional narrative. By marrying the sea, the Doge was performing a magical act of sympathetic binding. He was ensuring the sea's continued favor, calm waters for its merchant galleys, abundant fish for its people, and protection from the storms that could shatter its fragile wooden world. It was a spiritual insurance policy taken out on the city's most vital and most unpredictable asset. Furthermore, the ritual cleverly inverted the traditional power dynamic of a marriage. Venice, personified by the male Doge, was the dominant partner. The sea, personified as a bride, was the one being taken, possessed, and ruled. This was a public declaration that the Adriatic was not a no-man's land, but Mare Nostrum, our sea, a Venetian lake. Any power that dared to challenge this dominion was not just a political enemy, but a homewrecker, a violator of a sacred bond. The sheer, overwhelming opulence of the Bucentoro was itself a form of psychological warfare. The foreign ambassadors on board were not just guests, they were a captive audience meant to witness this display of untouchable wealth and naval might and carry the story back to their own kings and sultans. The ritual was a perfect loop of self-affirmation. Venice's power allowed it to stage the ceremony, and the ceremony, in turn, reinforced the perception of that invincible power, cementing a city's identity as the undisputed queen of the oceans for centuries. And so our journey across continents and centuries draws to a close, leaving us standing amidst the lingering echoes of 25 of history's most bewildering ceremonies. We have witnessed monks who sought to become living Buddhas through years of agonizing self-mummification, and entire medieval towns gripped by a plague of unstoppable, frantic dancing. We have seen children sent to sleep forever on icy mountain peaks as offerings to the gods, and warriors who ritually transformed the bodies of their enemies into bloody effigies for their war god. From the symbolic marriage of a city to the sea itself, to the ecstatic piercings of Taipusum and the logic-defying cargo cults born from the wreckage of modern war, we have explored a spectrum of human belief so vast and varied it stretches the very limits of our imagination. Each ritual, in its own unique and often shocking way, represents a profound attempt by a community to make sense of a mysterious and often frightening universe, to impose order on chaos, and to connect with forces greater than themselves. Despite their incredible diversity, from the joyous laughter of the Roman Hilaria to the silent stoicism of a Spartan boy enduring the lash, a single, powerful thread connects them all. What appears to our modern, rational eyes as bizarre, illogical, or even barbaric, was within its own specific cultural and spiritual context a perfectly rational and deeply meaningful act. The self-mummifying Soka monk was not committing suicide, he was undertaking the ultimate path to enlightenment. The Carthaginian parents who offered their child to Baal Hammon were not monsters, they were performing the highest duty to their community, believing it was the only way to ensure collective survival. The Naga headhunter was not a savage, he was a spiritual farmer harvesting life force to nourish the soil and protect his village. These rituals were not born from ignorance but from a different kind of knowledge, a knowledge shaped by myth, by a visceral understanding of the natural world, and by a desperate need to answer the fundamental human questions of life, death, and our place in the cosmos. They were technologies of the spirit designed to manage fear, secure prosperity, honor the gods, and affirm the bonds that hold a society together. As we look back on this incredible tapestry of human practice, it forces us to look inward, to examine our own time and our own cherished rituals with a new, more critical eye. We live in a world of our own strange ceremonies, after all. We gather in massive stadiums to worship sports teams, performing specific chants and wearing the sacred colors of our tribe. We stand in lines for hours to purchase small, black, glowing rectangles that we treat with near reverence. We document our lives on digital platforms, performing a curated version of ourselves for a global audience in a ritual of social validation. From the quiet solemnity of a courtroom to the exuberant pageantry of a presidential inauguration, our lives are filled with behaviors that, stripped of their context, would seem just as peculiar to an outsider as the Wicker Man or the Oracle of Delphi seem to us. This begs a truly thought-provoking question. Centuries from now, when archaeologists and historians of the future sift through the remnants of our civilization, which of our modern rituals will they unearth, study, and declare to be utterly bizarre and completely illogical? What deeply held beliefs of ours will they see as the product of a strange and unenlightened age? History has shown us that the line between the sacred and the strange is often just a matter of perspective. The rituals we have explored today are not mere historical curiosities. They are powerful reminders of the incredible breadth of human imagination and the universal drive to find meaning in a mysterious world. They challenge us to be humble, to recognize that our way of seeing the world is not the only way, and that the human spirit is capable of astonishing, terrifying, and beautiful expressions in its quest for connection. We would love to hear which of these 25 lost rituals resonated with you the most, or which one you found the most shocking. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this fascinating conversation. And if you enjoyed this journey into the heart of historical mystery, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because there are countless more enigmas from our past just waiting to be uncovered.